Book prize season is upon us. We're less than a month away from the Booker International Longlist being announced, and it's going to kick off a whole array of amazing book prizes talking about their best books of the year. So let's start off by predicting what I think will make the Booker International Longlist, which is the world's most prestigious prize for books translated into English. And I particularly love the prediction videos for this prize. I love watching them, I love researching them, I love making them. Because translated fiction is so diverse and so different from itself. I love learning about the weird and wonderful books that have caught the eyes of other readers out there. And I don't really care if they get their predictions right. I just love learning about that weird Hungarian dystopian novel called Eye of the Monkey, that feminist Korean hit called Capitalists Must Starve, that Mexican novel about mental illness and grief called Eating Ash, or that Slovak novel with the absolutely amazing title, This Room is Impossible to Eat. Are those books foreshadowing my prediction? Honestly, I don't know. I wrote this introduction to this video before I bothered to figure out what books were eligible or even had a coherent thought on this subject. Now, the critics among you will say that I'm yet to have a coherent thought on this channel, and while that may be accurate, I will say, at least when I was growing up, my parents loved me. Enough hurling abuse at my imaginary enemies, let's talk books, and we're starting with the logical combination of a German language book from Georgia. The Lack of Light by Nino Haratischwili, translated from German by Charlotte Collins and Ruth Martin. This is a very long book and I am currently reading it, but I'm on hold because it turns out when you make the resolution to read slower, it's very difficult to dedicate the time required to read a 750-page book in a day when the library lets you know that they want it back. Anyway, the first third of this book is about a woman who has been invited to an art exhibition to view the photos of one of her childhood friends who is now dead. And she spends most of the book to date reminiscing about her childhood with the artist and with two other girls growing up in a post-Stalin Tbilisi. I'm getting massive Elena Ferrante vibes off this book. It's really discussing and analysing and capturing that complex friendship between young girls as they grow up and figure out who they are. All at the same time, it is building this setting of a Tbilisi that is full of contradictions and mid-evolution as they change their values and their points of view from enforced to their own, the bleakness that they are moving out of and the realities of their daily life. Now, this author was longlisted for the award in 2020 with The Eighth Life, and from the 200-ish pages I've read, she definitely has the literary skill to merit being longlisted again. But, you know, no book has a right to be longlisted, and you never know exactly what the judges are thinking or if there's an unheralded book covering a similar topic that the judges simply prefer. But I think I would be much more surprised if this book were to miss out than if it were to make it. If I were a betting man, my money would be on this book making it before any other. Moving on to book 2, Vaim by John Fosse, translated from Norwegian by Damion Searls. Yeah, I guess this is the obvious choice. This is Fosse's first book since he won the Nobel Prize in 2023. He won't be the first, and he won't be the last author to be longlisted for this prize after a recent Nobel Prize win if he were to make it. I would go so far as to say Nobel Prize wins are more important than previous Booker form when it comes to the eyes of the judges. And indeed, I think most readers when considering what might make the long list. This is a book I've been really keen to read, but I haven't managed to get to it yet. I will read it and review it on this channel at some point soon. Yakia travels from the fishing village of Vaim to the city in search of a needle and thread. Cheated twice, he returns to his boat, where he falls asleep as waves rock the hull. Soon he is awoken by a woman calling his name from the quay. There stands Eliana, the secret love of his youth and the namesake of the boat, with a packed suitcase. She pleads to come aboard. In what follows, the single encounter reverberates across 3 narratives and 3 deaths. That is definitely not a description that turns me off, and I see lots and lots of potential in that as a novel. But it's not something that screams, I must read it. What is drawing me into this novel is the utter strength of reviews and the author's very impressive CV. I guess if Fosse is the obvious choice because of his past awards, then Daniel Kehlmann's The Director is the obvious choice for the simple hype around it. This is translated from German by Ross Benjamin. G.W. Pabst, one of cinema's greatest, perhaps greatest ever director of his era. When the Nazis seized power, he was filming in France. To escape the horrors of New Germany, he flees to Hollywood. But under the blinding Californian sun, the world's most famous director suddenly looks like a nobody. Not even Greta Garbo, who he made famous, can help him. And thus, almost through no fault of his own, he finds himself back in his homeland of Austria, which is now called Ostmark. The returning family is confronted with the barbaric nature of the regime. But Goebbels, the Minister for Propaganda in Berlin, wants the film genius, and he won't take no for an answer. He makes big promises. While Pabst still believes he'll be able to resist these advances, that he will not submit to any dictatorship other than art, he has already taken the first steps into a hopeless entanglement. Now, I'm a bit over Nazis and reading about them in general, but there's a lack of reading in my past from the German point of view, and this sounds like it's going to explore topics like the subtlety of resistance and the subtlety of coercion within a real dystopian society, and that doesn't just sound really interesting, it sounds very relevant to our ever-improvingly joyful world. I think I've played it really safe with my first 3 picks, so I do promise that from here on out we are going to go off the beaten path just a little bit. I'm definitely not going to pick the 13 titles that I think are most likely. Instead, I want to pick 13 books that are all realistic, but I want to make the most intriguing long list and have books in there for everybody that showcases the vast array of literary talents out there in translated work. Also, I don't think the judges are necessarily going to pick the best 13 books. I think they're going to pick the best long list as a whole, and that's definitely my aim with this. However, before I go on and talk about more books, I do want to talk about The Elephant in the Room, the book I loved that is eligible, but that I'm simply not going to predict, and that is On the Calculations of Volume, Book 3 by Solve Ballet, translated from Danish by Sophie Hershey-Smith and Jennifer Russell. This is a Danish literary version of Groundhog Day, very much giving me vibes of something along the lines of I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, in that it inspires thoughts and ideas. And I simply love that some of these questions are profoundly human and deeply literary, and others wouldn't be out of place in a Dan Brown-esque bestseller. There are questions that pertain to the plot and the world that just keep you interested and keep you wanting to read, while in the back of your head you have these deeper thoughts running as well. Now, I have heard from one of my patrons that she found this book really boring, and I can actually really see why somebody would say that. It is definitely a book that needs to capture you, and if it doesn't capture you, it's not going to work for you. But for me, I'm completely captured with this novel or this series, and I just want to read more of it. And I wouldn't be overly surprised if it was longlisted, but I'm not predicting it because I don't think as a novel this stands alone. I think each book in this series builds upon the last. I also note that book 4 is out in mid-April, which means 2 books in the series are eligible. And look, the publisher of this title is favour. So, I mean, look, Favour's always going to have a lot of spots because they're quite successful at this, but also Favour's always going to have a really strong canon of books that they can pick from. And I do struggle to see them nominating both books in this series. And I know last year books 1 and 2 were eligible and book 1 was longlisted, but when you move into the middle of the series, I just don't see it happening for so many reasons. Other books which I have read that I'm not predicting but I would absolutely love to see on the long list, and I think are really strong books, are Shakina's Kiss by Vivek Shangbag and When the Crane Flies South by Lisa Risdon. Two very, very different books, but very compelling reads. Back to the novels I am predicting, and yes, I did indeed foreshadow this one. Eye of the Monkey by Krisztina Tóth, translated from Hungarian by Ottilie Mulzet. Eye of the Monkey begins in the wake of a devastating civil war that leads to the formation of the United Regency, an autocracy in an unnamed European city. The ravages of war are sweeping, and the populace has been divided into segregated zones, where the well-off are under massive surveillance and the poor are phantom presences, confined and ghettoized. On the verge of a nervous breakdown after being followed by a young man for weeks, Giselle, a history professor at the new university, seeks the help of Dr. Mihaly Krutzer, a psychiatrist who is navigating divorce and the recent death of his mother. They soon begin a torrid love affair, but everything is not what it seems. As Giselle begins to unpack her family history and the possible roots of her psychological crisis, Dr. Krutzer, who has ties to some of the most powerful people in the country, possesses ulterior motives of his own. In Toth's deftly written dystopian and polyphonic novel, full of twists, turns, and treachery, we plumb the depth of a fractured, disturbed, and isolated society, as well as the underbelly of social perversions such a society produces. In this intricate web, stories within stories reveal the complex lives of women and men who struggle to negotiate the network of power and poverty that have shaped their lives and their relationships to one another. Hungarian literature has produced few amazing authors, and it's one of those countries whose literary impact is much larger than its population suggests it should have. And Tóth is one of the most popular Hungarian novelists out there. And maybe it's time we realise that Hungarian literature is way bigger than Magda, Imre and Laszlo, although we should acknowledge that that is a pretty strong starting position. Anyway, this book really makes me salivate in anticipation of reading it. Twists and turns, literary fiction, a complex relationship, and social criticism. I don't actually know why I'm going to like this novel, because there are so many different ways I could be enjoying this book and I could come away praising it by the time I finish reading it. I simply have to read it. And I want to note that this was a pretty hard choice to put in, and I've put this book in over Laszlo by Nello Belderman, an author who is only 21 and is receiving a stupid amount of praise. And maybe I'm being silly, but I just don't see two Hungarian novels making the long list. Even if Biederman is Swiss, his novel is something distinctly Hungarian, but I would love to be wrong on this count, either on two works about Hungary making the long list or on Laszlo making the long list. It does sound like a fantastic book. Another country with a fantastic tradition of literature that we are only just breaking the surface of is Bulgaria. She Who Remains by Rene Karabash, translated from Bulgarian by Izidora Angel. High in the accursed mountains, in a village ruled by the ancient laws of the Canaan, Bekcha escapes an arranged marriage by becoming a sworn virgin, renouncing her womanhood to live as a man. Her decision sets off a brutal change of events, destroying her family and separating her from the ones she loves the most. Years later, Bekcha, now Matea, tells their story to a visiting journalist. Long-buried truths come to life, along with the realization of all that might have been. This sounds very deeply feminist, trans-positive, and it sounds like it is exploring a clash of ideas and expectations, which always makes for wonderful literature. My sixth prediction is What Remains by Bryce Lamela. translated from Galatian by Jacob Rogers. In the mid-1950s, more than half the inhabitants of the village of Negrida were driven from their lands in a brutal experiment to turn backwards country people into modern cattle farmers. What Remains follows a young Galatian student researching this vast project of forced resettlement by the Franco regime. Amid the weight of unsettling archival documents, the voice of the displaced, and a sweltering New York summer, the unnamed narrator discovers the mysterious story of a woman who disappeared from her shelter without a trace. As he pieces together her strange fate, he confronts his own temporary status in a foreign land and wonders what it means to call a place home. This would be the first time a book written by a Galician author made the Booker Longlist, and I think this represents a trend in both Spanish and world literature to not hide away from local and lesser spoken languages and embrace all the diversity and differences offered by those languages that we are yet to really explore the literature of. And in addition to that, I think rulers such as Franco, Mao, Stalin, who had such power but often struck too much fear in their subordinates that they would never tell them why an idea wouldn't work, they really fascinate me. How so many people can be made to do such stupid things that everybody knows are wrong out of fear. This also sounds a little bit like a mystery novel with a bit of a literary twist, a bit of social criticism in there, and I love the use of such a simple but enjoyable plot device and turning it into something much more literary and complex. Galician is not the only language that would be new to the Booker International I am predicting in this video. I'm also predicting Vietnamese will make it. Parallels by Vu Ding Gayang, translated by Kai Nguyen. Gigi, H, and Ken are young and homosexual. They soon find themselves caught up in a menage a trois that forces them to grapple with devastating consequences rooted in wounds from their private pasts. Embedded in violence, insanity, betrayal, homoeroticism, and surrealism, Parallels is a riveting account of how carnal and emotional scars can determine how we love and hurt each other. An exquisite debut that introduces readers to the astonishing gifts of Vu Ding Gayang's imaginative power and distinctive style. I read a few reviews of this, and out of all the novels that I have selected for this prize, but a few reviewers called this book a fever dream, while others were saying that when they figured out what the authors was doing, this novel suddenly became unputdownable. And I feel like those two different reviews are very consistent with each other. Now, this was written all the way back in 2007, and I often think books that are old enough to be completely forgotten but then are still translated, they have the potential to do really well in this prize. I mean, if it were trash, nobody would be bothering translating it nearly 20 years after it was published, would they? It's clearly made some sort of impact in Vietnamese literature to have it translated into English now. The eighth book I'm predicting is This Room is Impossible to Eat by Nicole Hochholzenova, translated from Slovak by Julia and Peter Sherwood. You put your arms around me in front of my father. Your daughter is very special. 1250, 1351, 1452, 1553, 1654, 1755, 1857. Teresa and Ivan share secrets. Teresa is now in art school, away from the town where she grew up. Ivan is a teacher and artist. Teresa is now 19, Ivan 57. They have known each other for years. Teresa shares her secret with her friend Sylvia. Ivan does not tell anyone. He constructs memories of Teresa to keep in his bed at night, covering them with sweat and tears. In this minimalist poetic novella with autobiographical elements, Nicole Hochkozanova weaves a story of obsession and power, and how both can lead to damage and separation. Rich with symbolism, its explosive themes of eating disorder, abusive control, and family dysfunction are directly handled with honesty and intelligence. A controversial bestseller that has been awarded prizes and widely translated across Europe. I do have a concern about picking up this book. It has not been released in English yet, so when I decided to look up and read a lot of reviews, they were all Slovak. Look, every one of those reviews mentioned the amazing prose. Even the negative reviews complimented the amazing prose. And I think prose is the one element that is almost certain to be completely changed by a translator. So what I did was I read a sample of this novel, and I wouldn't call it necessarily beautiful, but it was gripping and emotional, and it certainly made me want to buy it then and there on the spot. I wouldn't call it beautiful, but I would call it fantastic. And look, this novel represents a book that could definitely make the long list, but more importantly to me, it represents a book that I just want to read, and I suspect quite a few of you are in the same basket. And that's why I love watching and making these videos, to find these hidden gems. Even if this doesn't make the long list, even if we never hear of it again, you've heard of it now and you have a chance to pick it up. And it's worth noting that Slovak would also be a new language to the Booker International. So that's 3. Moving to more charted languages, we're going to South America and Solitaria by Eliana Alves Cruz, translated from Brazilian Portuguese by Benjamin Brooks. Maple has been staying in the Golden Plate, the most expensive building on the block in an unnamed city in Brazil, for almost her entire life. Yet her presence there is merely that she is an inhabitant of a minuscule room with her mother, Eunice, who along with Mabel provides round-the-clock attention and care for the wealthy families who lives there. As Mabel grows up, her dissatisfaction with the forced smallness of her life becomes difficult to bear, and she is driven to work towards new possibilities for herself. Eunice does the best that she can, uneducated and with a daughter and ailing mother, both dependent solely upon her. Her life is a series of limitations. She moves through the rooms of the penthouse suite in silent servitude, and though Mabel is ashamed of this invisibility act they've both perfected, the era of slavery is still fresh in the country's consciousness, and Eunice thinks it's best not to dwell too hard on such things. But when tragedy strikes and a little boy dies, Eunice must decide if she can face the indifference and injustices of the ruling class she has spent so long orbiting. Some really strong reviews coming out for this novel, and there's so many different things to look forward to. I mean, we're talking complex mother-daughter relationship, Afro-Brazilians living in Brazil with the memory of slavery still being present, the metaphor of smallness and how that is going to impact every part of their life, I assume, and of course the animosity that exists between society's haves and have-nots. All Flesh by Ananda Devi, translated from Mauritian French by Jeffrey Zuckerman. A child is born with an insatiable hunger. As the ravenous infant, she is the undoing of her mother. Under her father's adoring gaze, her body grows and grows. Her father claims that she devoured her twin sister in the womb. Her classmates delight in tormenting her for her size. And inside this girl, so alone and so enraged, is another hunger, a hunger born for revenge. Bizarrely poetic and grotesquely humorous, All Flesh is a twisted fairy tale that tears apart hypocrisies around beauty, gender, and a culture that relentlessly consumes the marginalized. I am just captivated by this novel's description. Fat phobia is obviously a massive thing, and I think it's pretty misunderstood in our society, even by fat people. And I think having good representation in literature that explores this issue and puts it into the minds of readers, of the different experiences people have within the fat community, and even one fat person to another fat person doesn't have the same experience, and being able to learn and empathize about that is super important. And at the moment, we really only have things like curvy protagonists in a romance novel, which is also very important. Romance is quite a good genre for sorting out their prejudices, and it would be good if literary fiction caught up with it. Anyway, this is not the only reason I'm interested in this novel. Poetic and grotesque, a captivating description for this subject matter, and it gives this feeling that it could be bordering on horror. I think horror is such a powerful and underutilized tool in literary fiction, and this is what I ultimately love about translated fiction, that their markets are not as genrefied as ours, and emotional coming of age novels about a teen girl growing up that explores some sort of prejudice can have a horror vibe, and that the publishers wouldn't just say, no, that's unmarketable, we can't publish it. That's what I love about translated fiction. Venice Requiem by Khalid Lahamlay, translated from French by Ros Swartz. On the 22nd of January 2017, Pata Selabe, a 22-year-old Gambian refugee living in Italy since 2015, arrives in Venice from Milan. He leaves his backpack near the Scalzi Bridge, puts his train ticket and residence permit into a plastic pouch, and then plunges into the cold water of the Grand Canal, amidst the gaze of onlookers and tourists. As he drowns, some insult him, while others shout Africa. Outraged by his tragic death, the novel's narrator, a young writer based in Paris, follows Pata's trail, aiming to piece together and understand the sequence of events leading up to his death. Venice Requiem tells the story of a Venice where literature grapples with the pressing dramas of our time. Throughout the novel, the narrator quotes authors who lived in or wrote about Venice: Goldoni, Thomas Mann, Ernest Hemingway, Lord Byron, Marcel Proust, and others. Through a dialogue with the writing and experiences of these authors, the novel explores the potential of literature to rescue humanity. You want to read this book, and I want to read this book, and there's about half a dozen different ways that this novel could turn out to be amazing. That's why we both want to read it, so that's why I'm predicting it. My Woman by Yulia Iluka, translated from Ukrainian by Hanne Laliv. My Woman is a stunning and rare novel comprising of a series of stirring vignettes about women confronted by the countless brutalities of war. It locates the voices and devastating experiences of those who have been silenced, those who have lost loved ones, those who have fought and preserved, and those who have broken down. With an original style, with a poetic repetition, the nameless protagonist, My Woman, brings succinct and emotionally charged stories that evoke life during war in Ukraine with an intensity that is excruciatingly difficult yet deeply moving. I don't think anybody really needs to question why I put this novel in my prediction. This is exactly the sort of powerful novel that will be right at home on the long list. That is a dozen books. It is time for one more. We Are Green and Trembling by Gabriela, Cabezon, Camara, translated from Argentinian Spanish by Robin Myers. From deep in the wilds of the New World, Antonio writes a letter to his aunt, the prioress of the same Basque convent he escaped as a young girl. Since transforming into Antonio, he has had monumental adventures and taken on numerous guises. He has been a mule driver, shopkeeper, soldier, cabin boy, and conquistador. He has wielded his sword and slashed with his dagger. Now hiding in the jungle and hounded by the army he deserted, Antonio is looking after two Ganari girls he rescued from enslavement. But the new world has one more metamorphosis in store, which might save them all from extinction. based on the life of Antonio de Erasio, the real-life figure from the Spanish conquest. We Are Green and Trembling is a masterful criticism of religious tyranny and the mistreatment of women and indigenous people. This queer, baroque, tender and surreal novel conveys glimmers of hope for the future within the brutal colonial history of Latin America, finding in the rainforest a magical space where transformation is not only possible but necessary. Camara was shortlisted in 2020 with China Irons, and so this is definitely one of my safer picks, but this is another book that I see so many different ways that it could captivate and amaze me, and that is why I am picking it. So to recap, my long list is The Lack of Light, Vaim, The Director, Eye of the Monkey, She Who Remains, What Remains, Parallels, The Room is Impossible to Eat, Solitaria, All Flesh, Venice Requiem, My Women, and We Are Green and Trembling. If I am right, there are 3 first-time languages, 11 languages in total, with 13 different countries represented from 13 books. 4 books from Eastern Europe, which is, I think, a huge number, 2 from Asia, Africa, and South America, and I've not picked a single book from one of literature's strongholds. That is a combination of China, Japan, and Korea, which would definitely be a surprise, but that's how I see it. I've also completely avoided short story collections, which is definitely my bias and my preference. We will find out how many books I get right on the 24th of February, but there are so many talented authors and intriguing sounding books that are eligible for this prize. I would love it if you told me in the comments what has caught your eyes, or what book you've read in the past that you would love to see make this prize. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye bye.
To read or not to read? Don't be an illiterate swine. Subscribe to Gunpowder, Fiction and Plot.